This video is about Fallout, the first one, the original, but it won't be talking about its mechanics, graphics, or its difficulty. It's a much more personal look at the reasons why Fallout proved to be so popular in Eastern Europe. The post-apocalyptic theme wasn't fantastical. For us, it wasn't make-believe. We were living through a somewhat less irradiated version of a societal post-apocalypse, living through the period that follows a fall, a period of transition and recovery. The fall, in this case, was that of communist regimes all throughout Eastern Europe towards the very end of the 1980s, be they of Soviet influence or considerably more nationalistic, as was Romania's case. I can only speak from my perspective as a Romanian, though I trust a lot of what I'm about to say will ring at least partly true for the rest of my Eastern European brothers and sisters. You let me know. I was born in 1986. Romania stopped being a communist country at the very end of 1989 with the overthrow and subsequent execution of the Ceausescu couple. This means that Romania became a free country from the very onset of 1990. Emerging out of the sterilized and regimented world of the Vault is thematically identical, even if flipped as through a mirror, to shifting an entire population's economic system from a planned one to the free market, and its society from an authoritarian controlled one to one where you could suddenly say and print anything about anyone. Just as the Vault dweller steps outside the cave and is blinded by the first rays of sunlight they had ever seen, so were we also stepping into this much wider world we knew existed, but which had been kept from us for generations.
You know, I want to see the world.
Having to deal with economic uncertainty is something that my parents got the full brunt of, but enough of it trickled down to me to get a basic understanding from a very early age about which expenses were priority and which weren't. Some were so outside our realm of possibility they didn't even warrant discussing. Much like the various settlements throughout the wasteland, daily life was fraught with uncertainty, and long-term financial survival was never guaranteed. The currency system based on bottle caps was something strangely familiar to some of us kids, not because they were ever used as actual currency, although for most of the 1990s our national currency depreciated so much and inflation was so high at times that we might as well have done that. But no, bottle caps were familiar because as kids, playing in the concrete slabbed parking lots behind the brutalist apartment buildings, we used to play a game in which we would wager bottle caps, and depending on our skill, equipment and luck, we would play to ideally win more than we had wagered. This game was something in the spirit of pitching pennies or closest to the line, but it would take too long to describe how it actually worked because there's more socio-cultural aspects to it, and that's not relevant. What is relevant is that for a while, bottle caps had become a sort of currency between us kids. If you do want me to explain how the game actually worked, let me know in the comments and I'll make a companion video to this. Likewise, growing up in my version of Eastern Europe in the 90s, rats were definitely something we were way too familiar with. Again, as kids, due to how garbage was disposed of. Again, not something I need to go into detail, but just to give you an idea, there were times when all of us kids would band together and engage in what can only be described as rat hunting with boulders. Look, we had to entertain ourselves somehow. There were only 2 TV channels and they both sucked. Disaffected factories were a pretty popular sight in many towns and cities, mine especially being an oil refinery town. And most of the cars, some of which were several decades old by the 90s, only functioned because of continuous weekend maintenance and jury rigging by the local neighborhood amateur mechanics. Thankfully, one important distinction between Fallout and 1990s Eastern Europe was that guns generally weren't in the picture. But all of this that I've described up until now is only really the tip of the iceberg and refers to what life was like in the cities. Once you went to rural areas, you might as well have time travel to the 1890s or earlier. The through the mirror effect I described earlier extended to the difference in tech level between our vault for countries and the rest of the world. or the wasteland. The vault dweller teaching the Shady Sands farmer about crop rotation and fixing their well is akin to how modern, what was then current day technology from the outside world could now easily enter the country. Of course, for most of us, because of the economic troubles outlined earlier, we couldn't really afford any of this new tech, but at least it was available now. The technological gap between what we had as opposed to what the West had is also reflected in the retrofuturistic setting of Fallout. This world where things still ran on vacuum tubes and nuclear energy was a common sight for those of us who had either parents or older siblings who were electronics hobbyists. Just to give you a wonderfully anachronistic example, at the start of the 90s, the peak of audio playback was if you had a reel-to-reel player, or a magnetophone as we call it. While the West had already started shifting music to CDs, compact cassettes were our bread and butter well into the mid-2000s. This fit in very neatly with the piracy culture that sprung up from the communist-era black market, and this extended to any media you could easily copy on magnetic tapes, whether we're talking about music cassettes, movies on VHS, and of course, Spectrum games on tape. I myself played a very small and side role in the market of pirated Spectrum games in my town. I say small and side because of my age at the time. If I were older, things would have been different. But music piracy was definitely the thing that brought the real money, and going into the hub's many shops was very similar to going to the very public market stalls where pirated music cassettes were being sold out in the open. Later on, pirated CDs would show up, as well as pirated game CDs, usually in the form of compilations. And I still have some, and they still work, and I make videos about them. Link in the pinned comment. What Fallout did was to offer us a power fantasy we could relate to, in as much as I've managed to draw parallels between the game and growing up in the post-communist 90s of Eastern Europe. In our case, the power fantasy wasn't about saving the vault or saving the population from a regional threat. In our case, the power fantasy was that we could survive in this new outside world. With the right combination of companions, tools, know-how, and luck, let's never ignore luck, we could perhaps manage to at least save ourselves so that maybe our offspring can lead better lives. The ending of the game is bittersweet. Having achieved the unsurmountable, it changed you. And even if the Overseer had allowed you back in, it is unlikely you would have stayed. By that time, you would have seen and done things that nobody in the vault could ever relate to or comprehend. In fact, the very moment you saw those first rays of natural sunlight, you had already surpassed anyone and anything you left behind in that vault. This is the only way this portion of your life story could end. It still stung, and it was difficult, knowing you'll never return. But deep down, you eventually knew there was no other way. One person's solo walk into the desert with their head down is that same person's beginning anew. Some of us, a lot of us in fact, chose to never return to our vault. Even if it's nothing like we left it, we were forever changed by our adventures in the wider world. For some of us, the simple memory of life in the vault is enough to make us prefer the challenge and danger of the outside. Fallout was less escapism for us and much more something we could relate to on a subconscious level. A subconscious level which hopefully I managed to bring into the light of the conscious.
Fine job making it through the defenses, mate. I'm rather impressed. Toss me your name.
This was a very special video, something different than what I usually do here on my channel, but if you enjoyed it and want to give the rest of my stuff a chance, click on the video on the left of your screen. If you'd like to support me, thank you. There is a link to Patreon on the right of your screen and my GOG affiliation link in the description. I've been Steven Nonsense, thank you very much for watching, and good luck out there.